now. Okay, so thank you so much, Prof. And I will start by letting everyone know that this session is being recorded. So I'm just going to make sure I keep it more focused on the systematic review methods. First and foremost, I'm glad that I met with you in person and we had the first review lecture about the systematic review, where we took some time to really understand what is a review, what are different types of reviews, and how does a systematic review look like. In this session, I'm going to spend much of my time trying to continue from where I stopped. And then I'll take all that through to the end. So hopefully we'll be able to get to the end today on how is a systematic review done. And please feel free to ask questions as you try to think about your research question and ask questions on how you would go about that. I'll start by asking each of you to type 1 if you can see my screen and you can hear me clearly, and type 2 if you have challenges seeing my screen and you can't hear me clearly. Excellent. Glad to know that everyone is seeing my screen and you can hear me clearly. So I'll start by giving you a recap on what we looked at, what we started, like what were the objectives of this exercise or this session. What we did last time, we were interested in learning or defining, systematic reviews and trying to differentiate them from each other. And we did that very well last time. Also, what we talked about, we started on the process of trying to understand what is involved in conducting a systematic review. So we also did that. We also took some time to quickly think through the review standards, guidelines for conducting and reporting these reviews. And we did not go far. And therefore, today I would want to spend much of my time talking about this. So we're going to spend much of my time really diving into these reviews. Another thing we're going to try to understand is to try to really identify tools and resources to manage each step of this review. Please, I request you mute yourself as you're joining. So basically, we're going to try to identify the tools and resources and how we manage each step of this systematic review, and that's what we are going to look at. If time allows, I'll be able to do a case study where I'll bring to you one of the studies I've just concluded, which was a big systematic review, and try to use that as a case study to walk you through the steps we would have looked at. That's if at all time allows. If it doesn't, at least I would have given you the tips on how to run this systematic review.
No recording hano tungota na can recorded na. No kwa recording.
So moving forward, I think household keeping, please make sure you mute yourself as we're trying to make sure this is going on well. So let me give you a recap on the type of reviews for people who were not here last time. So if I give you a recap, I'll start by showing you this wonderful slide where I've used all the colors that I love. And here I've tried to show you that there are 6 types of reviews. We have what they call a narrative review. We have what they call a systematic or systematized review. I think I'm going to allow Prof to be a co-host so you can help me mute people.
Sure.
But I want to pay attention to this. So we have 6 types of reviews. We have what they call a narrative review. We have what they call the systematized review. We have what they call a rapid review, scoping review, a meta-analysis, and a critical review. So we spent some time last time looking at these types, and I think I managed to give examples of some kind of narrative reviews I have done and how they look like. I also gave you examples of some kind of scoping reviews that I've conducted and some meta-analysis that I've conducted, critical reviews and rapid reviews. But today, we won't spend much time looking at more of a systematic review. So when we met last time, we looked at some of the pre-review tasks. And one of the things we talked about is define or develop a research question and your objectives. And they should be clear because these clearly inform your systematic review. The other thing we talked about is to think about, scoping existing literature on the topic, because you need to understand what people have done already on the topic. Have there been any kind of systematic reviews? And if they have been done, how best have they addressed the problem you want to look at? And if you think people have already done that, there's no reason why you have to repeat what people have already done. So we're going to spend some time trying to look at this. And then the other thing we talked about last time is forming a research team and trying to assign tasks based on how the review would be done. For that reason, we looked at things related to, how do you, complete the review? And then we talked about determining, the eligibility criteria. When do you decide that something is eligible to be included in your review? We talked about designing on the literature search methods and scope. We also looked at some kind of things of doing the assessment of this. And I'm going to step back and try to put more light on these because these are very key when we're talking about reviews. So therefore, let me start with the real key thing on something we looked at last time on how you go about this. I know we spent some time talking about, how you design the inclusion criteria. What should be in an inclusion criteria? What should be in an exclusion criteria? We did talk about that last time, spend some time understanding it better, and I will use today's time at the end of the session to run a case study. That's enough of the recap of what we looked at. Why don't we start with today's business? Today's business is to look at literature searches. How do you search literature? So I would probably advise you to, one, you could work with librarians, they help a lot, or you could probably work with people, especially your supervisors, who can advise you on how you conduct your searches. But the other thing you should also know, you should look at searching multiple databases. You could look at traditional ones or even look at the gray one. But as you're doing those searches, there are different other additional tasks usually we do, which is called unsearching. So these are all brief sentences I'm putting here. I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes trying to talk about each of these in relation to literature search. So let's start with how do we go about that? So the search process is very key. But one thing we need to know, ask yourself, why does it matter? So if your search process is not clear, chances are high that you're going to have problems for the rest of the systematic review. And the other thing is, it's very important that you identify the search concept because these clearly inform your search. And because you know the search concepts, it's going to be easier for you to come up with the search terms and know which kind of key terms you need to put together to make sure you can pull all together previous studies done about that topic. And then think about how do you construct the search strategy. And to me, every time I work with students, I tell them, until your search strategy is clear, I can't give you a go-ahead to move to the next step. Because if I give you a go-ahead and you move to the next step and you can't do it right, then there's a problem. So the first thing I usually focus on is to make sure the search process is clear, is thorough, you've got clear search concepts, search terms, and you've constructed them in the best way. And because of that, we also tend to look at choosing the database and the websites where we can get all these kind of things we need and validating the search. One thing we should be able to take note of is you need to validate the search before even you dive into the whole exercise. Because if this is wrong, it means what you're going to do down the process is actually going to be also wrong. And the last thing we usually focus on is documenting the search. So I keep telling people when you do this search, thank you so much. Can you document it as you're doing it? Because that's very key, that it's going to guide how you explain your results. And once you've done all this, you need to export the result searches, and then you can supplement that with hand search. But we're going to dive into some of these as we go on. So one of the other things we needed to talk about, this is just the key process of how you do the search. But let's look at where to search, because telling someone search, this is a search process doesn't help, but where should we search? Where should we go to search for this? So in this slide, I'm going to spend some time talking about where to search, which databases, which websites. So I'll probably remind you that in the previous sessions, we tried to think through what is the topic. We thought through what is the inclusion criteria. We thought through what is the exclusion criteria. That is very key in trying to identify the databases and the websites you want to search. But once you do that, it's always very important you think about the published, things that have been published on the topic and where have they been published. Because that's very key to tell you where you need to go to search the information. And think about the types of literature you want to include in your review, because once you think of those, you already have a feel of where you want to go, because you can't be doing something that is completely, or it's related to, say, something related to construction material, and we expect you going into public health databases. You would be lost. We'll probably be telling you, please go to Scopus, try to look at, this kind of articles, look at this kind of journals. So think through what you're doing and where you should be able to go. So because of that, I have shared with you some of the common use databases. Some of these are key to public health. Some of these are key to science, like Web of Science is one of where we find, repeatable journals published. I don't expect you to spend some time, in journals which are low quality, which actually some of them are not even looked at as scientific journals, because that means you're going to have issues with your work. So think about where could you find the right information to guide your search. So this is something we all think of, and I would probably tell you there are things we are going to do in the search, and we may not get all the studies we need. So for that reason, we have a big problem that if we're going to look for all this search and we can't find some of the things, sometimes we recommend to do what they call the hand search, which is we are beyond doing the databases, but can we do the hand search? The hand search could be based on looking out for things related to so the hand search are things which are beyond the database. They should be things which are from gray literature. It should be things which are handpicked. And I'm going to give you some of the techniques we do for that. So here you talk about the hand search. So the hand search, one thing we should know that there are different ways in which we could do the hand search. And this hand search could be done when you're contacting experts or stakeholders of their gray literature. When we say gray literature, these are the reports. We have people who do consultancies. We have people who do research, and they cannot publish it in a peer-reviewed journal. So what they usually do is they put out technical reports. Those technical reports are key. They contain some key information that you may need to know. And therefore, some of those are not in journals. And if you search the Web of Science, you won't find them. So we tend to do what they call the hand search, to really consult with this to see, where is this? Do you have someone who have done this work? Did they produce a report? Can I look at that report? Even dissertations that have been done. And sometimes we even have unpublished data sets or research data, which is out there. The other thing we tend to do is we tend to look at, you've got 20 papers. And in those 20 papers, you can spend some time looking at the references, especially those good papers, to see who are the people you're citing. What studies are you citing? Are they citing in their work? And based on that, you can go and look for those papers, because those papers may be very key to the study area, the study thing you're doing. So that's more of the hand searching. But now let's think about constructing the literature searches. How do we construct to say, I am doing this study, how do I develop the search terms for my study so I can pull all the evidence about that topic? So that's called constructing literature searches. So ideally, when we do this, we usually think about combining texts. We're trying to combine keywords. We're trying to combine terms that we can use to pull all studies together. And that's what we call constructing literature search. So here, there's something I've tried to talk about, which are called the mesh terms. So the mesh terms are some other terms we usually add on our text to pull things together. And this varies depending on the database. The mesh terms I tend to use in Scopus may be different from that I use in PubMed, may be different from that I use in Web of Science. And I'll share with you one link of kind of an online system that I use to generate mesh terms for my search strings. Usually once I build it, I usually get that text that I think is good, paste it in that link, and that link will automatically tell me for Web of Science, this is the right mesh terms you can use. For Scopus, use these mesh terms. And that helps me to narrow down, not to bring garbage. The issue we have is someone says, I'm going to do literature search terms, and he pulls 100,000 articles. If you start to see yourself pulling such articles, just know something is wrong with your literature search, because the literature search will be able to bring you articles really related to your work. So another thing is, here is what we can use, other terms we usually use. We use all. So if you want to expand your search, we tend to use a joining word of all. For example, we have showed you, if you remember when we started this session, I gave an example of a research question that we wanted to look at. And this was looking at the people, which is the PICO method, and we wanted to bring up that together. So if you see, based on that, I wanted to bring everything. So what the search will do, will bring every article that has mentioned aged, every article that has mentioned elderly, every article that has made. So all this, because you put all these articles will be pulled. So meaning that you're going to have a very big kind of results of your search. But sometimes we want to narrow down, and we tend to use the word and helps us to narrow, where we say, we are looking at paper, or we're looking for a paper that mentions this and also mentions this. So if a paper just mentions only this, it will not show up. So and helps to bring only papers that mention the key things you want. For example, if I'm looking at construction materials and I'm trying to look at cement and I'm trying to look at roads, and I want to only see articles that talk about construction materials, cement, and roads, I will use and in between those terms. And the only papers that will come are only papers that talk about the three terms I've mentioned. But if I choose to say I want so many, and I put all in between that, it means I'm going to receive all papers that mention construction materials, whether it's construction materials in dams, construction materials in water, construction materials in GIs, they will all come. If it's cement, it will do the same. So we tend to use different terms to narrow down our searches. But we also tend to use nons if we want to exclude things, where we say, I want this, but not this. So meaning that a paper that mentions, say, construction materials and say water, I could put not water. So meaning that anything with construction materials and water won't show up in my searches. So we tend to use these to do that. Another thing I wanted to give you is a snapshot of these. When we put everything together, how does it look like? And in some cases, you may have a list of terms and you want to say, I'm adding this on that. So I'll give an example that you may not be able to say road construction. And there are other terms you are going to use for road construction. Or you may want to say, I'm going to talk about, for example, let me use sanitation. We all know we have, let me give which example. Let's talk about CEDAT. If I want to do a search on courses in CEDAT. It means I'm going to need to pull geomatics, civil, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering. I can choose to say and it will bring all that. But if I only do that, it means some courses I'm going to leave them out. So I may want to bring courses and say, okay, I want to look at electrical engineering, but I also want to have all courses that talk about telecom engineering, all courses that talk about, dam construction, dam and installation. So then that brings all these terms together. And I know we shall look at an example in detail. And here I give you an example of a kind of a search term that was built, that we looked at the edges which are here. We said and, meaning that we need a study that talks about all this up, okay? So we need a study that talks about this, but also that study must be mentioning some of these terms. Whereby if it's only mentioning this alone, it does not show up. It can only show up if it mentions this and this. So, and then sometimes we go ahead and say, no, it's not only about this and this. I want it also to be mentioning this. Meaning that I can have like 300 studies that are talking about this. But because I've added on this, the 300 drops to 200 because there are only 200 studies that talk about talk about this and this. And then I can further say, I also want you to add this, and then the 200 drops to, say, 30 studies. So this helps you to narrow down all your searches. Let me use a real example. If you look at this table, so this table, we try to answer our research question we talked about last time, where we say the peacock element is talking about the people. And the people, we want people who are aged, who are senior citizens. So you see that all these terms here used are all related to people who are old, because anyone who's a senior citizen is supposed to be old, a certain age above. So when I did this search, I had about 3 million studies showing up. I cannot do a systematic review on 3 million studies. So that means I can't do that. So what I had to do is to say, I also want to see that of all those people, maybe they have registered to have got maybe influenza vaccine, maybe they have got this kind of vaccination. This automatically dropped to 32. Again with that, I felt like maybe I also need to look at something else. And I said, let me look at those that actually talk about this. So you probably see, if I'm only talking about this, I've got these searches. When I talk about this, I got this. When I talk about this, I got this. So if by any chance I put O between P and O between these, how many studies do you think I'll be having? You could type 3 in the chat if you could tell us how many studies would we be getting. Type 3 in the chat if you could tell us the total number of studies we would get if we use a joining word of all those key terms. How many number of results or articles would we find if we used a joining word of all? Can I give it a try? And you tell us why. How many number of results would you find? Yes, Aaron. Aaron? Yes. So according to Lawrence, we may get about 3,981,000 studies, 341. Could you tell us, Lawrence, why? Why do you think we'd be getting such? Lawrence, can you tell us why do you think we'd be getting that? Can you explain that to the whole class?
Yeah, I think it's because when you say O, it means that you want either number one, search number one, on such number 2. So it's going to have both of them. And the same thing with 2 and 3. That's what I think.
And that's true, because it means you are saying all articles that have mentioned this, plus all articles that have mentioned this, plus all articles that have mentioned this, you need all those articles together for your review. Therefore, that means the articles that mention this is this number. So that means you're going to add on also this number, and also you're going to add on, and that makes life hard. So for that reason, we say, no, let's not use that. Let's use and. And surprisingly, if you use and, this narrows down to 872. And that means we've got 872 studies we can bring in our systematic review, which is exciting and easy to do. And I'll be frank to you, for all the systematic reviews I've done, I have started up in millions and I've started in hundreds, thousands, but papers that I've done systematic reviews, they have never been more than 50. The biggest study that I've done with so many papers on a systematic review is been 278, and that has been the biggest review. And that was bringing a lot of robo stuff in there. But even to narrow down to that, we started from millions. So a proper systematic review, if you see yourself showing millions, hundreds in your systematic review, just know either your research question is not focused and just need to do something. Okay? So let's go to the do's and don'ts. What would you do when you're doing this? So I've given you some of the best practices. One, make sure you search multiple databases, because that's the only way you'll be able to bring together some of this. Two, use, you try to use a combination of keywords. And I've given you example in the previous, study, to show you the different keywords. And make sure you look at spelling, variations. For example, if you are searching something on, say, viralization, the English people will use S where there is zation, whereas the American people will use Z or Z, whatever you call it. So if you use S, it means everything which has got Z will not show up in your search. Whereas if you use Z, everything that has got S will not show up in your search. So I advise that you try as much as possible to use all the different spellings that could bring out that. Some Americans use letter A in writing. Some, the English people use letter A as combined with E in writing some words, whereas the Americans do not use the A. So make sure you bring out all that. Another thing is, it's important to use the kind of, field tags, use document searches and all that. But the things you should not do, and I think people who have worked with me have heard me say, this is no work done yet. So things you shouldn't do is never search one database. And two, never use few search terms, because if you use few search terms, you're going to leave out a lot of things. And then three, you need to think about, some kind of mesh terms and understanding, this search. And I think before you do a systematic review, it's very important you step back and think about the complexity and the expertise and then everything needed for a systematic review. And feel free to add several people. I think you find there are few people who write a systematic review and it's only one author. They usually have more than 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 authors, because to do a review, you need all those expertise to come on board to help you in trying to produce an excellent piece of work. So that's enough about systematic review searches. If you have any question, please, could you type A in the chat and type B if you don't have a question. If you need clarification about systematic searching, please do the same. Okay. Yes, Prof.
No questions.
Yes, no question. Yes. Please make sure you type so I can know before I move forward that we are all together. Because if you don't get this, then it means what I'm going to talk about, you won't be able to get it. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Good. So let's go to what they call managed citations. Some articles are not free and need payments. How do you access them if they appear in your results? I think that you have to work with your advisor on how to go about that. And sometimes if you can't completely, access them, when we are writing this review, I'm going to tell you about some of the tricks we bring about in writing, because we are allowed to put a limitation section where you can say, this review is being done, but we couldn't find. But I would not recommend you to look for it and make sure you get the article.
Dr. Musa Manga,
Yes.
in the next colloquium,
Yes.
we shall be showcasing the databases that the university subscribes to and how you can access them as students. So we shall have a solution to that.
Okay, excellent. All right, so let's move to how do we manage this? You've pulled so many articles. You pulled 3 million articles, 500 articles. How do we manage this? In the next few 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to spend some time talking about managing citations. So if you see here, under this, I'm going to talk about 3 things. How you export your citations to the citation manager, which I'm so sure you all know about and you've been working with. 2, I'm going to talk about starting to use the Prisma flowchart, okay? Because that's very key on any systematic review. You can't do a systematic review without the Prisma flowchart to tell someone how did you systematically narrow down from this point to this. 3, I'll talk about the removing of duplicates from the search. And then I'll use an example of the confidence to talk about how do you manage a systematic review. So, and that would help to show you more on that. So let's start with this. There are software options for citation management. We have free ones, like Mendeley is free, and I'm so sure most people are using that. Zotero is also free. You can also use it. You don't have to pay anything, and you can use it at any time. But there are those which you have to pay for, a subscription, like EndNote and all that. I didn't say this one, even if you're being recorded. But in Africa, we can find EndNote for free because we know all different ways of cracking it and getting it. But I didn't say that. If you want something, you can't fail to get those at 0 fee. So, and I've used Mendeley, I've used Zotero, I've used EndNote, and those are the ones I've really worked with, and they have done a good job. I've liked EndNote very well because EndNote keeps all things I've done from previous projects. It keeps all my things together. Mendeley does the same. So use something that you feel comfortable using. Here I've given how to compare the free kind of citations and how they work, and spend some time to look at which one you think you are comfortable using. I don't want to dictate on which one to use. So make sure you use any, as long as it can help you manage your citations and you don't have, I have read people's dissertations and they have used manual citations and there are a lot of errors. And that is something as a PhD student you shouldn't do. 3, most PhD students tend to do an error in exporting their citations. They go to Google Scholar and they click on citation and then they export. That is wrong. Please do not use that method, because that method, once you use that, what it does, it goes on anyone who have cited that paper, and how they have cited is how you extract that information. Never use it. The best way to export is go to that paper, open it, the paper will have where they say export citation. Just go to where the paper is from. And therefore, you'll be able to export all the strings related to that citation. That even if when you're writing and you want to change the format to anything, the string would have all those things that you need to show up in your citation. So avoid taking that short route, okay? Anyway, let's talk about the citation management process. So assuming you spend some time running the searches, as we've said, and you've downloaded the results in PubMed, in Scopus, what you've done, you can export those to the citation manager. When you send them to the citation manager, it will automatically tell you these are duplicates, and those would be removed automatically, or it will tell you they are here and it's up to you to delete them. Once you do that, there's what we call the screening tool. I use Confidence. Confidence is what I've used in all my systematic reviews. I get all what I've got as my searches, I send them to Confidence. And in Confidence, I'll be able to see the duplicates and I'll do my screening, and I'll take you through the screening that I do when I use that. And then once we're done with that, the next step is trying to get all these into Zotero. And in Zotero, I try to look at what are these articles now. Now I want to look at the full articles. So by the time I've narrowed down from this point to this point, by that time I have got articles which are either 600 or 700 here. Whereas by this time I may be in thousands. All these are still thousands. And then from duplicates, this may drop to maybe 10,000. By the time I do the title and abstract screening, I have narrowed down. And then I put these in my Confidence again and do my screening. And I'll show you that. How do I screen? How do I exclude an article? How do I include an article? I'll tell you that. So here I've showed you the citation management tools, the citation management tools and resources, what we're going to talk about. But I've tried to show you different databases that we usually search from. We search from Web of Science, Scopus, all these PubMed, and those are all possible databases. What I told you, and I'll repeat, before you go for this, make sure you check where your papers are cited about that topic you are doing your review. Once we're done with that, we do the exportation and we do the Confidence. So these are the kind of the key steps we usually follow. And in the next few slides, we are going to dive into this. But let me talk about the screening. So screening of citations is one key stage of a systematic review. At this point is when you make a decision which article should be included in your study and which article should be excluded from your study. And you do not do this unless you already have an idea of what you're doing and you know what you're looking out for. So one of the things we are going to talk about under this is we're going to talk about screening titles or abstracts of citations to include in the study. And then we're also going to look at how do we locate the full texts and do also the full screen, screening. In this slide, I'm trying to show you the key steps. But before you do any screening, please think about the purpose. You cannot do the screening unless you know or you recall what is the objective and all that. So determine which citation meets that eligible criteria that is going to help you to answer your research question. And then the other thing you need to be thinking about, which is very key, think about the team members. I keep telling people, you can't do a systematic review alone. You can't sit on it and say, I did it and this is perfect. You need a second eye to check on what you're including if it's really answering those objectives. And we're going to talk about that. And in most cases, I tell people, look at about 52 hours. So if you look at that, that's about 10 days. So the screening alone is a big study, a big stage of your systematic review. And that should happen very well, because if you do something wrong there, everything is going to be a waste. But let me give you the tasks. The first task is to make sure you import and you try to remove the duplicates. So make sure, get all these results, import them into your tool, and then try to remove that. And then the thing is you need to pilot, the screen, pilot screen to see what you're capturing. Because if you bring so many articles in and you run it for the 1 hour and everything is being excluded, that means what you have is wrong. Or that means what you have is rubbish. So you need to go back and check your search screen, because you can't spend a whole day that you brought 10,000, 100,000 articles and you see 80% or 90% is all rubbish. So that means you need to think about that. And this is something we usually do with the reviewers, where you say, we have 2 reviewers, try to screen, let me try to screen. And if you also see that you are 2 reviewers and one is excluding, another one is including, and you find that the number of conflicts actually rising all the time, that means the 2 people, the 2 people are actually on a different page in understanding the topic. Come back together, think about the topic so you can go and screen when you're being effective. Once you complete the first phase of title and abstract screening, it's when you feel a bit relieved, because that's the point where things narrow down. And once you finish that, the next stage is going to be to upload PDF of articles to try to look at now the full text. Because the first thing was to look at only the title and the abstract. Are the terms I want in the abstract of this article, or are they showing in the title? If they are not showing there, take it out. Now, if they are showing, that doesn't mean that that article is important to your work. You need to do a full screening now in the real article. And that's where you say, let me quickly run through this article to see if really this article is related to what I'm doing. Because sometimes people can mention things in the abstract, yet the article is completely talking about something else. So you go to the next phase of full text screening. Once you finish that, then you're supposed to be happy about yourself. But 2 things you need to know about the inclusion. So this 2-stage process, which looks at the abstract or title screening and the full text screening, you need to have at least 2 people. And these 2 people should be independent. And they should do what they call the blinded screening based on the exclusion criteria you put together. So these 2 people will be somewhere else and they'll all be screening. And as they screen, of course, there's going to be problems. There's going to be conflicts whereby someone is going to say no, another is going to say yes. What this system does, it will not throw away an article that 2 people have conflicted each other. It's going to get that article and put it in another band. And it's going to say maybe. And therefore, what you're going to do, it's going to be a conflict. So you're going to need a 3rd person to come and resolve, to come and look at it and say, I agree this should be excluded or this should be included. And that's why they call the 3rd person to resolve the conflict. And then once you do all that and you think everything is good, we tend to look at the check of these reliability of that. So let me share with you the confidence. So this confidence is an online systematic review management tool. I don't know if you have access, it's a simple tool that you can pay subscription, it's not very expensive. And then you could run, and you could even do it, you can put yourself as the whole group, PhD group, and say we need 1. And then you can use all that one for all of you to be doing your work in different projects. So it tends to look like this. And I'm going to show you what it is. So if you see here, it shows they have done the title and abstract screening. They are showing that 4,707 are things to be screened by this person. And then what they have said that already 271 have been screened. This one person has voted on them, meaning that you need a 2nd vote on them. There's no conflict yet because there's 1 person who has voted already. And if another person comes and he votes something, then this one will show a value to say, either these are 4 articles that is a conflict, that someone said yes, another one said no. Therefore, we need a 3rd person to come and look at them to vote them. These ones have not been voted at all. So it tends to look like this. The good thing about this, that you don't even have to draw the prisma. Once you finish, you click here, and the system automatically produces the prisma for you on how you've done your study. But this is something that could probably be used. I've also showed you another review summary of, this is the study I was doing with my group of mine in Makerere. I think that's the civil group. And what we are trying to look at is we're looking at volatilization of biohydrogen from fecal sludge. And in this study, we imported everything, and over 8,550 were removed by the system automatically. The system managed to detect and say, these are duplicates. Don't waste your time reviewing them. I am throwing them away for you. And then it also came here after doing our screening, and we realized 9,650 were irrelevant articles. So we excluded them. And then we came to the full text, and here we said, oh, we got so many studies, but 56 could be excluded. Okay, and then at the end, we ended up having 39 studies. And these are the ones that we did the extraction on. And these are the ones that are going to appear in our review. But we started from up. Of so many studies we are put in, and we kept removing them. And that's what they call systematic review, comes from that systematic process of trying to review literature to narrow it down and be able to report the right thing. Another screenshot I'm showing you here is to show you how the screening is done. So the confidence will give you such a user interface, and it will show you all the studies that you've probably imported into, that you brought in here. And what you only do is you click on this, you read the abstract, and you say include or exclude. Exclude means we don't need it. Include means include it, okay, into the study. And you keep doing that throughout all the different studies. And usually we put the addition, add the criteria here, add highlights of things. So everything you add here, in the Prisma will bring it for you. So you don't have to go in the Prisma and do it manually. Everything you have used to do this study will show up in the Prisma. And we usually even put notes. What note? You probably say, oh, I've read this study. It reports a very key aspect on this. Oh, this study, I'm excluding it because it is blah, blah, blah. So you put all that even if someone is going to come back to your process, you can actually see why you excluded something, why you included something, why you did A and B and Z. So that's what we call screening. Before I move forward, type 1 in the chat if you're okay with what I've talked about, and type 2 if you need clarification on the things I've talked about in regards to screening. All right, Hidayah has a question. Please, can you go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Doctor. I would want to know, before we actually do the screening, do we have to have downloaded all the files, or we can just use them, for example, from any web page or whatsoever? I don't know whether my question is clear.
Yeah, your question is clear. Thank you. So what we did was that there are two types of screening. There's what they call the title and abstract screening. And therefore, how do we get the title and abstract screening? All the titles and abstracts are free for reading online. And therefore, what we did, we developed the search terms. We went and searched from different databases. And from every database, the results we got, we went exporting them in our Confidence. So if we did Scopus and we found like 2,000 studies, we exported them into Confidence. We went and checked, for example, Web of Science. We found something, we put it there. So everything we are finding, we are exporting it there. At that point, we've not downloaded an article. We are only exporting the title of the studies, like the way they appear in Google Scholar or something. And I'll show you an example on how we do that. Once we send them there, they come out to show up like this. As they show up like this, it means we have not downloaded anything. What we have done is we are going to read this title, And if we feel we are not convinced, we are going to click this abstract to display the abstract. And we read the abstract. And if we are convinced from there, we can say include. If we are not convinced, we can say exclude. So meaning we've not downloaded anything. The downloading usually comes on the next phase of screening, which is the full text screening, where we need to look at the real article.
Thank you, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, I have another two from Johnson, please. Johnson?
No, it's okay to something related to Hidayah. I think you've covered it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Doctor.
You're welcome. I think I can see Robert. Robert, you have a question, please?
Yeah, thanks, Doctor. Mine is about the exportation to Covidex, that process. Well, where I get from the database to the Covidence, that process of exportation. I need more clarification around there.
Okay. So I'll start by asking a quick question. Have you tried to search, which database have you been comfortable to work with?
It's normally Science Direct, what? Yeah, Science Direct.
Okay, that's fine. When you go to Science Direct and you type something you're looking for, it will show you a list of studies that are related to what you type in, okay? Once you finish that, if you go on your right corner, there are going to be 3 tabs. One saying export, one saying share, one saying there's download and all that. Click export. When you click export, it's going to ask you how to export it. So in there, they'll give you format. And in trying to export, or sometimes what they do is download. So it will download this as a package of abstract, like in a different format. Now, what you do is when you come to Confidence, you're going to click and say import. Confidence will take you to your kind of explorer of your computer, maybe in Word, in documents or desktop. Go click on that thing you downloaded. Once you click on it, it's going to automatically upload all the searches. The ones you saw the other side are now going to be the searches showing up in Confidence, and they will show up like this. And I'm happy to do, I think we may do a case study. I think if time allows, to using one of the studies I've done to walk you through how we downloaded, how did we do that? And I'm happy to do that with you.
Dr. Musa Manga, we should make the time allow it, so.
Okay, so we'll do that. Yes, Rokidi.
Yes, Doctor. My question is on the issue of subscriptions.
Yes.
Some of these papers you have to have paid for them. Some are free. Doesn't this process affect the process of some papers being free and others being paid for? Affect the process of filtering and uploading this information? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. As Dr. Gitudu said, he's going to talk about subscription later, but that will not affect the process. The process of all titles are available for free. All abstracts are available for free online. So the first stage of screening would be fine. The only stage that may be affected, that would be the full text. That means by the time you have something to go in the full text, it means it's an important paper you need. The reason why we have 2-stage screening is to save time. So you don't waste time downloading so many papers which do not make sense to you. It's a process that is helping us to save time, not to download. You may find someone, I've ever had some students working with me, and for over 6 months, they are doing searching and screening. I'm like, what are you doing? And I'm doing this. And then literally after some time is when I'm like, I think the student maybe doesn't know what he's doing. That's why he's spending sleepless nights for 6 months. And then when I sat down with them, I'm like, oh, I think this is the right thing you're supposed to do. The next 1 month, they had results for me. So this process helps to save you time, but doing the right thing of bring everything that you need about the topic. You look at the titles and look at the abstract to know which one is relevant to your study. And whatever is relevant, that means by that time the studies have narrowed down and you can now start even looking for things you need. Any questions? Good. All right, let's go ahead and look at one important stage. And to me, when I do my job as an editor in the several journals, and someone submits a systematic review, usually I don't spend time to say you've written to me 400 pages or 20 pages. No, I first go to your methodology. And if I go through a methodology and I find you have issues, immediately I don't waste my time. I say the results are wrong and I'll reject that paper. If your methodology is okay, I have no problem. I'll send your paper to the next stage and invite reviewers, because then I'm so sure any mistake can be addressed, because that means you have the result somewhere, but maybe you didn't present them. So this is one important methodology thing. Conducting quality assessment. Every time you're doing a systematic review, do not do a systematic review unless you've performed a quality assessment stage. And this is a critical stage for appraisal of the studies you included. What happens here? You can find 30 studies and they're all good studies, or you find 60 studies and they're all key to your work and they're perfect and you want to include them in your review. If you just include all of them, you're going to have problems, because that means you've not done the quality assessment of the studies. And I have a belief, I keep telling this to my students, garbage in, garbage out. So if you bring in garbage to think about it, that means whatever you're going to write is going to be the same thing. So the most important thing is to do quality assessment. Assess the studies, look out what are the rigorous studies. Base your review based on that. Not every study they publish is rigorous. And therefore, do not just include studies of poor quality in your review, because you have issues. How do you do the assessment is what we're going to talk about in the next 5 minutes. So here we talk about assess quality of included studies. So what we do is we need to assess each study using a validated kind of tool, and we need to do that to check what's the quality, what's the risk of bias. There are some writers or authors that write something and they are biased towards what they wanted. And that's not true. Some people draw conclusions which are not supported by the results. Some people write results whereby the methods they used actually not okay. Some people have results say something different, and the discussion says something different, and the conclusions are something different. Such studies should not be included in your review. So, but how do we exclude them? We don't just say this study is biased and throw it away. We follow a criteria and we score studies, because some studies, the study may be weak on the results, but the method is strong. And if the method has got more points, it's going to score highly. So what we tend to do is we assign variables, we assign scores. At the end of the day, we have a value for total score for the studies. And what we usually do, for me, I usually say, okay, how have my studies scored? All studies that have scored more than 85% should be included. And studies that have scored below 85 should be excluded. And that's the cutoff. And by that cutoff, I may reduce my studies from, say, if I had 80 studies or articles to include, they may reduce from 80 to 40 or 30, because I use that criteria. In research, we don't do something we can't justify. We should have a proper criteria for doing that. So what do we do here? So we tend to depend on the type of studies included. We may use different tools. We may use one tool, or you may use two tools. You may find that because the studies are different in nature, in context, some are longitudinal, some are causal. So depending on the type of study, you may use different tools. And this quality assessment can be completed by one or two reviewers. In most cases, I recommend two reviewers to also control the bias. So I can do the same and I say, let me assess, and then I have another reviewer also assess. And then at the end of the day, we come and say, okay, do we have the same studies scoring above this? If yes, we are lucky. Let's get moving. If no, then we find out what the problem is. And here I've showed you some useful tools and resources you can use. And these are some could guide you on how you assess. So the assessment is quite interesting. And I'm going to show you an example of an assessment form, whereby in the assessment, we look at such things. And these are kind of the things I use when I'm even evaluating my students. Are you going to assess the quality? And you assess based on what are the objectives? What is the context? What is the process? What's the study design? What is the data collection? So all these play a huge role when you're doing the assessment. And that's very, very key. So based on this, I am happy to say this study scored this, and I give it a score. So if you see, for example, I'm looking at objectives, I can say, were the objectives and the purpose of the study described? Yes, good. Okay. And then I look at all this and I say, I give a certain value. I come and ask myself the context. Was sufficient detail provided on the context or setting of the study? If it was, I come and check, okay, they gave a broader concept, and then I assign a word, assign a mark to that. So I go doing that, and there are different quality assessment scores. Why we say this is important? You can't do a proper study without objectives, without study design, without data collection, without data analysis. Some people, that's why when I'm evaluating students, I ask myself, did you provide analytical methods for this study? If a study is missing such things, all these are characteristics of grading a good study. And if your study misses all this, that's rubbish. Even when I'm examining, I have my criteria that I look out for in any study. And I start from abstracts, methods, abstracts. I go to the objectives, look at the methods, look at the discussion, look at the results. And that's the one I use. And there are different criteria that you can come across there. So the same thing we do on the studies, and then we score them. And then in most cases, we tend to produce something like this, which will show, oh, the study scored well, it has a low bias, a low risk of bias, or it's unclear of risk of bias, but there's a high risk of bias in this. We usually give them values. And even we report this in the write-up, okay? And then we make a decision to say all studies that are reported like this should go. And this, because you may find that we do this, but then we get the summation, because one study may score low here, but score high on the rest. And that's why we want to get a summation of those, and we get studies that scored high on average. And that's what we call quality assessment. And based on that, we narrow down again. So remember, we started with we did the search, we exported, removed duplicates, we did abstract screening, we did full text screening, we've done the bias. That means all that we are narrowing down. The next stage that we go to then is called complete data extraction. This is the most important stage. You've scored up all on that and you've narrowed down. If you don't do well on the previous steps, it means you're going to get to the data extraction and you're going to be dealing with so many data sets, wrong stuff. Here, we are only narrowed down to a few articles that really are key to our study. And under this, we tend to focus on extract data from included studies, and we tend to create tables for studies for the manuscript. So from the data extraction stage is when we generate tables that are actually going to be put in our systematic reviews. At this stage is when we think of figures. At this stage is when we think of conceptual flow diagrams. At this stage is when we think of maps, So this stage is a key stage. That's where we write who are the studies, where were they conducted, which year were they conducted, what were the objectives, what did they report? We will do all that on this. So this stage is very important. So usually we do the data extraction from all the studies we have included in our study. And the first thing we need to think about before we do that, think about the purpose, and think about the objectives again. Think about what was the aim of this review. What were the objectives? What data do I need to answer my objectives? And then at this point, still work with the team members that you've been working with, and they have got, they have experience on this, but it's usually a time for about 48 hours, which is about 2 or 3 days. That would be enough to give you, to work on this. But one thing we need to do here is to start to complete this task. We need to identify any additional data items to extract. At this point is when we write down what do we want to extract from these studies. What is key that we need to pull out from these studies? And then based on that, we create the data extraction form in the tool specified within the protocol. So we can think of, not even use this, think about what data extraction sheet can I use? We usually we draw this in an Excel form, and then we review as we're exporting things from there. And that helps. Once we're finished with that, we can pilot it, because if you do a data extraction sheet, you need to make sure it's having all the tabs you need to extract information. And you can pilot it and say, oh, it doesn't make sense. We need to change it to make sure we extract more information on this. Or we need to change it to narrow down because this is too much information we're extracting, we're not going to use. And then ideally, you need to have at least 2 to 3 members. At least 2 people should be part of that data extraction, because that helps you to pull together all the data sets you need. Once we're done with this, we need to think about simple data extraction form. I'm giving an example from one of the studies I've done, where I report who is the review, the review title, what's the study ID, what's the study, who are the authors, when do they do this? Was it a randomized study? Was it an experimental design? Was it, all those should be pulled out. And here I share with you some of the data extraction process. And what I'm trying to tell you that when you think about the data extraction process, you need to think about all these studies and make sure you're answering the review questions. I repeat, do not extract data unless your review questions are clear. You have proper objectives. Once you do that, you can then develop evidence tables. And when you're developing these evidence tables, you need to think about what data you need from each of the included studies. So think about, I've got this kind of studies. What data do I need from study A, study B, study C? And all that data you should be having a table, which is going to be your evidence table. And after doing that, now you can think about the high-level findings, because sometimes you find someone did a systematic review and it can generate long tables with data that's not making sense, with data that is not even connected to the objectives. Once you pull all these evidence tables together, now sit back and think through what is the key information I need to share with the audience. Because when you're writing a systematic review paper, it doesn't have to be long. Systematic review papers, these different journals say we need 10,000 words, 15,000 words. The maximum I've seen is 17, because you need to also feel sorry for the person who's going to peer review a journal. So we look at, they say 10,000, some even say 8,000. 8,000 words to 15,000 words. So if you're going to extract too much information, it means it's going to eat up all your review before even you tell a story with your data. Another thing we also need to bring up is every table you have to be able to clearly define the characteristics of the results. Who which country were they conducted? When were they conducted? What's so special about? So give characteristics of that, okay? And those are very key. And then you think about, to see how you can complete all this review as a team. So here I give an example of a data extraction table that I've ever done in the past in some of the studies. So here I said I had the study ID, the collection date, which country was the study, which design was for that study, who participated in there, was this happening, lockdown period? It was about COVID. We looked at what was the sample size, the gender that we are looking at, and all that. And all these are things that I extracted from the study. So this study clearly is something different from what other studies may be. And therefore, the table of extraction may vary depending on the type of study. Type 3 in the chat if you're okay with that, and type 4 if you need clarification or you have a question before I move to the next stage. Excellent. I think let's move on to one of the most important stages of systematic reviews, and that's the stage of writing. Now, here, you can't do the writing unless you've done all the first stages, as we've been looking at them from how do we search for data, what search strings, where do we search the data, how do we remove duplicates, how do we do, all that have to be done. The last stage we do, which is very important, is writing up results. What we need to know about this stage, that this stage usually has 3 steps. You need to think about constructing a Prisma checklist, and you should be able to look at that Prisma checklist. And I know I've shared that with you, and I also provide links in these slides that you could be able to check it. It tells you what are the guidelines. In 2022, we received an updated version of the Prisma checklist. And when you're submitting your manuscript, some journals require you to even submit the Prisma checklist, and you tell them of that checklist, what are the guidelines did you follow? Because there are so many. They ask you to tick the kind of guidelines you considered. So in the Prisma checklist, which I'm going to share with you, is very key, and it guides us on how we report the results. The other thing is about writing the manuscript, which we all know. But the only thing I do today is to point you on what are the key things you shouldn't forget about when you're writing your systematic review. And then I also talk about supplementary materials. As I said, when you're writing a systematic review, it doesn't have to be so big. So for that case, supplementary materials some materials should go into the supplementary, because that material, you're providing a review of your manuscript with evidence that you followed A, B, and C. And you're trying to tell the review of your manuscript that, look here, these are my search terms. This is where I searched. This is what I found. This is what I reduced. And in some studies, like recent study we've just concluded, we had to submit even the search strategy to Prospero for approval. So Prospero reviews it. It's like kind of a journal. You send this, they review it, and they approve to say, yes, this, you should go ahead with your review. Oh, this has got problems, do not proceed. So that approval, you should attach it to your manuscript, or you should provide the number you receive that confirms it was reviewed and assessed. Why don't we dive into writing? So we all know about this, that before you do any writing, think about what you want to tell. Think about the storyline. Think about the key things you want to report, which should be answering your objectives. But also think about some of the team you've been working with, because there are people who would help on handling some tasks. Librarian could advise on some of the issues on how you did your searches. If you have the biostatisticians and you're doing a meta-analysis, you had to put together things, they'll be able to comment on what analysis you've done or modeling. For people who are doing engineering, I usually recommend to do meta-analysis. I tell them to do systematic review and meta-analysis because we want you to bring out the model perspective. And we want you to use the published data to model some of this. If you look at this, you should look about 120 hours to get things done. So there are different timelines we're looking at here, but we should look at 120 hours. If you've noticed, every stage I've been giving you the amount of time you need to spend on each stage. What I'm trying to avoid is for you to spend a whole year doing a systematic review. That's not right. Because that means by the time you finish your review, more papers have been published and your review is not even needed anymore. Because people have published most recent work and your review is not showing exactly what is up to date in the sector. So you should work hard on getting it out. So what we do is writing. Writing, you need to consult the Prisma. 2020 is the one that was published in 2022. This is actually providing all the resources you need to ensure that you report. And according to this, it's actually ensuring that you need to make sure you have the flow diagram, which is more of the Prisma diagram, and I've been showing you this. This Prisma guideline or diagram should be reporting those stages. And why did you exclude something? Why did you include something and all that? And we've been looking through this. It should also make sure it has got a kind of checklist. Fill out the checklist. The checklist is made in a way that you tick what you've considered, like what guidelines have you followed in your review. But then we have other things. Think about the cited sources and the citation managers. We've talked about that. Think about the supplemental information of all information you think would go sit into that. Now, I'm so sure everyone is wondering, is this different from a normal review or a normal manuscript? The answer is no. The systematic review articles is structured in the same way as you structure any kind of manuscript. It should have the title, it should have the abstract, it should have the introduction, it should have the methods, results, and discussion. I know most people who are doing reviews, they rarely report the methods used. If you write your review with no method used, don't think of that as a review. Any review, whether it's a critical review, a systematic review, you should tell someone what method did you follow to actually put together this evidence. Because that method, you want someone else to use the same method to do the same. So here I've tried to give you a structure of what would a systematic review have. Any title of a systematic review should have something like this to tell a reviewer or to tell anyone that this is a systematic review. All published articles which have been as a result of a systematic review should either be the impact of this systematic review, the influence of this on this, a systematic review, or a systematic review of mechanisms, analysis, or blah, blah of this. So it should be clear that the systematic review thing has to show up in the title. The other thing we need to know is it should be having a structured abstract, which we all know, and I'm going to talk about that. Should have a rationale and the objective for your protocol or for your review of why is it necessary to the sector. It should tell us about the search strategy, which we've gone through, the screening, which we've gone through, the data extraction, which we've gone through, and the Prisma. But the results should also be able to describe the results of the searches and also the study quality, which we've talked about. We should also be able to talk about the findings, summarizing the findings, and also talking about the strength and weaknesses. I usually ask my students, so what? Every time they report something, I say, you've told us this, so what? So you should be able to have the implication, and we're going to talk about all that. And lastly is more of the references. Which kind of references did you use? And I've already told you the tips of how to reference, which references you shouldn't import in your reference manager. And let's try to dive into this. The title. I may have already said to you that the title of a systematic review should not miss the words of a systematic review. This should be part of the title and in the nature of the study, because that is a study on its own. So a systematic review is almost a high end of a review, because the other one is a meta-analysis. It's more of a systematic review and meta-analysis. So it's something that is not underlooked, as someone could call it, just a narrative review, a critical review. This is a detailed thing. And then, as we said, and this is something we all know, that when you talk about an abstract, you need to think of a structured abstract, which should be a short paragraph, and this paragraph should be reporting mainly three things. What's the background of your study? Why did you do that study? What is the objective of that study? And what are the methods? And then from the methods, what are the key results from your study? And conclusions and implication of your study. And usually that's about 300 words. And some manuscripts or some journals even need you to use 200 words. So you should be able to learn on how to compress your study in those formats, but making sure, don't forget about the background and some of the objective, like of the main study. Don't forget about the methods, the results, conclusion, and implications. The introduction, we all know about it. And I think this is where I've had issues whenever I'm reading introductions, even on journals that I serve as the editor. When I read your introduction, I should be able to understand the rationale, the reason, the aim of your review. If I read that and I don't see that, there's a problem. And that aim and purpose of your review should have been backed up with where you come from in your literature. What have people done? What have they not done? And why do you think we need to do this? All that should be fine. And you need to explain the topics, because some people report the problems and then they report a different objective. And when you look at the objective, there's no way it ties back to the background you're giving us. So you need to make it simple, but make sure you tie it up. The other thing you have to think about is the methods. I am so sure for the 2 sessions we've had together on systematic review, now you know how to write a method of a systematic review. Now you know how to conduct a systematic review. What we've been talking about is what you should explain here, is only to explain the methodology followed to do a systematic review, which is what were the search terms, where did you search, when you searched, you did the screening, how did you do the screening, how many people did the screening, talk about the extraction, talk about the bias, how did you control the bias, all that should come up. The result is easy. Some of the results we usually like about the systematic review tend to tie back into understanding the characteristics of the studies that you've included. So in most cases, we need to think of these articles. Think about elements like the search results. We started like this. We found 100,000 articles. We excluded these. We had to narrow this to this. After removing this full text, the studies were these. From this study, we got this study included in the whole study. Of these 20 studies, 10% of these studies are coming from sub-Saharan Africa. 5% of them are coming from India or somewhere. Of this study, 8% of the studies have been looking at, application of geomatics, blah, 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 in land application. Whereas 2 of these studies have been used on maybe, infrastructure assessment. So you try to give the characteristics of the studies you found, because you're trying to report what people have done in that area. Sometimes we even talk about when they started to be published, like these studies, 90% or 50% of the studies were published before 2022 or before this. These, like, we give all those trends, we show maps of where, and I'll show you an example of, in my case study, of what we do like that. But also we talk about the quality of the studies, which we already talked about. How do you assess the best, the bias? and talk about other effects of the study. If your study is about effects, what do they say? If your study about mechanisms, what is it saying? Study by so-and-so talks about this mechanism as being more important. They looked at this and this. However, study by this indicated this must have been the reason. So you need to bring out all that evidence together. And then another section is the discussion. There's a difference between the results. In the results, you are being so fair, like you're being so, you don't go into detail to give us the implication of your studies. You don't go into detail to tell us the further areas of research. You don't go into detail to tell us the limitations. You don't go into detail to tell us your kind of perception, like your kind of thinking. It's you make them clear their results, and then the discussion is where you summarize your main findings, you share the study limitations, you discuss the reliability of the results, you give us all the implications, tell us areas of future research. And I keep telling this to students, do not do a systematic review or any kind of review, and you don't have a section dedicated to areas of future research. We need to see what's the current practice and what is the area of future research. Because that's the reason you do a review. And these should all be informed by your results. They should be informed by things I've been reading from up to narrow down to that. All right, the last things are all things we all know. Conclusions, give us the key takeaways. And don't tell us things we already know. So make sure you highlight things from your research, from your results, from your discussion section, and try to point out those as the key takeaways. And the other thing is try to talk about, give us the references. And I keep telling people some articles or some journals, they can do a desk reject of your paper based on your references. Because usually what we do as editors, we do what they call desk reject. When you submit your paper, I download it. The first thing I do is I scan through your abstract, I scan through your conclusions, I scan through the methods. I don't even want to go into the results yet. If I see problems in your methods, I'll reject it. If I see problems, I see your methods are okay, your abstracts are okay, your conclusions are okay. Sometimes what people do, they only look at references because their key references we know should not miss in some titles or topics. So I go and scan in there. I also look at, are you looking at the most recent studies? Or are you looking, because you cannot do a systematic review and only reporting studies of 1950s, 1970s, 1980s. Something is wrong. And therefore, the only reason it can be, given an exception is when we know that that paper or that writer was fundamental. But we can't find over 20 citations from such old years, and we let your manuscript move to the next stage. And then supplementary information. As I said, you've seen the review, it's been done over and over. By the time you finish the review, you have so many evidence. You have tables that you use to extract. You've got such strategies. You've got all that information. You can't put it in a review. Most people have a mistake of getting all that and they paste it in the manuscript. If you paste in the manuscript, you're going to fail to tell a story because it's going to be too much information. So what I usually recommend is put all these in supplementary and keep referring to it, cross-reference it. What you're telling the reviewer that, hey, such strategies that have been used were developed as a result, details of these are provided in S1. So the reviewer would probably go there and see, oh, okay, they are here. Or maybe the reviewer can tell you, can you bring back this in here for easy referencing? So, but make sure you provide supplementary information, you try to provide the tables, the figures, and you could see some papers which are published in ES&T, which is some of the IM journals, that most of this information is actually put in appendix. So the manuscript is very short, 8,000 words, but the supplementary information is more than 8,000 words. So meaning that they only put a story here and everything else is put in the supplementary information. To summarize this, I am giving you the documenting and reporting your search. I've given an example of how you can talk about your methods, which is we searched this from this time to this time. We searched this database from this time for this time. So you're trying to tell someone, where did you search? From what time to what time? Because if you searched and your search stopped 2 years ago, your results may be wrong, because we may be saying the last 2 years you've not searched, we've seen more than 100 papers. So if you included 30 papers here, it means these 100 could have been key papers to include. So that's why we have to report, when did you search? What did you search? And we want you to report all the database. We want you to tell us, did you have any restrictions? Sometimes we say we are searching between the last 10 years, data published within the last 10 years. And that's something I've already said. When you're searching and you find yourself, you're looking at 1,000 papers, 100,000 papers, 200,000 papers, please just know something is wrong. If you see yourself doing a systematic review that is trying to look at over, and in your review you are including over 500 papers, don't proceed. That's a wrong review. Completely, don't even bother. Just go back and think through yours. What we tend to do if we find that that's happening, then we tend to put in a restriction of time and say, of these 500 papers, can I only look at papers published in the last 10 years? That gives us a time to narrow down the studies in a way that I can discuss them in a better way. So try to make sure you can use restriction and say, I'm looking at studies which are published in English. I can look at studies which are published between this and this. And all those are kind of things you can talk about in your searches. You can talk about that in your extraction to say, who are the people extracting? So if these are all part of authors, use their initials to say, 2 reviewers, this and this one, did this. When they finished searching, we had conflicts which were resolved by reviewer, you put their initials. So that you tell a reviewer that, or you tell the reader, this is a proper systematic review that was done. And then that generates for you a Prisma diagram, which tends to look like this. What did you identify? What did you exclude? What kind of did you screen? What did you exclude after screening? What made the, the inclusion criteria for full extract? What did you remove and why? And then we even tell the reason why it was excluded. And then what did you include? And then studies for quantitative analysis, if you're doing meta-analysis. So a Prisma diagram should clearly communicate exactly what you did and how did you narrow down from big number data sets to a log. To summarize, standards for reviewing, you can access them. They are online, so many of them. Take some time to look at them. We usually submit our protocols here for review before we proceed with the review. But in your case, you don't need to go through that. But some papers, some interesting studies we want to register, so someone else does not come and plagiarize your study. So once you register it, then you own it. So no one can come and jump on it, and all other aspects. The guidelines, as I've said, they are all online. So there are different guidelines that you could look at. The aims, how to improve the aims of your study, the response, and some kind of tools that you could follow. All these are online. So I've been talking about the checklist. This is the checklist, which I said you need to attach this when you're submitting your manuscript. And what you're telling someone is a requirement is you should identify a systematic review in your title. Have you done that? Then you tick it. The abstract should say you used, they want to see Prisma in the abstract checklist. Have you done that? You tick it. So you go ticking, and then you need to attach this. It doesn't mean that you need to meet all of these. Some that you don't meet, don't tick. Tick only those that. And then for them as the reviewers, we check to see, is it meeting the requirement? Because the other thing we tend to do when we're assessing a systematic review is we want to keep checking back. Have you reported this? Have you done the bias, assessment? Have you? And once we see you've met most of the requirements, it should pass as a systematic review, and then we should let it go through. Recently, this is the new kind of flow diagram we are using, which tends to talk about, and you must have seen this in several papers, that Tell us what you see and what you removed. Tell us what you screened and what you excluded. Tell us, report, the how you retrieved and what you didn't retrieve. Excluded things, what are the reasons for excluding them? Did you exclude them on the basis of they don't report this? Tell us this. And even give us the number. Because at this point, we're interested in saying, why did you exclude them? Studies which were not reported in the last 10 years from this and this were excluded. Put the N of those that you excluded. And we need to know all that. And here I give you recommendations of references that you should spend some time looking at. And these are very key things. I'll remind you, when I started this class, I started with a poll everywhere to ask you, does anyone know about, or do you have knowledge about systematic review? And the truth is, some people said, no, we don't. At this point, I'm quite certain you are moving down that. And hopefully, in the next few months, you would be experts in here. So thank you so much for your time. And I'm happy to end that session of systematic review, principles and guidelines on how we deliver them.
I think there's a question in the chat.
Yes. Okay. I'm seeing a question here, which is, let me just get that question. How about desk reviews? It's not mentioned among the 6. How does it fit in the systematic review? That's a very good question. When we started this session, I first gave you the different definitions of reviews. In most cases, the review is reported or it's defined based on the approach used and what it does. So we said there were narrative reviews. So a desk, everything you're doing, the desk comes in from what kind of study you're doing. Sometimes someone can tell you I did a desk study of this. That doesn't mean it's a review. So review is defined based on the approach, based on the purpose and what is reported. Is it a narrative? Is it a systematic and meta-analysis? Is it a systematic? Is it a critical review? So those are the kind of the major types. Read more on the kind of guidelines I've shared on how they classify them, but those are the scientific ones we would probably put forward. Thank you for the great presentation. Is it possible to get the recording of this and the previous session? Yes, I can share the recording of this. The previous session, I delivered it in person, so I didn't record anything, but I shared the slides. And I think the slides, I don't know if they are with the class, the one who is coordinating, but I shared the slides of part 1, and these are I'll share the slides of part 2.
And we shall make them available through the coordinator.
Thank you.
Yeah, through the.
Okay. Can you type A in the chat if everything is okay, and type B if something is not clear and you need clarifications? Excellent. Okay, we have a B somewhere. Edward Baraba. I don't know if I pronounce your name right. Yes, Edward.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm sorry I missed the first session, but I wanted to understand the difference between, because I'm from the art department.
Yes.
I wanted to know the difference between what we do as a systematic review and what we do as an exhibition review. Because
okay, go on.
Yes, because what we do, we normally do an exhibition review. Something is happening in an exhibition, and then you go out to do a review of the exhibition, as compared to what we are looking at articles and all that stuff.
The truth is I've never done an exhibition review.
Yes.
And I've not done that, so I don't know what it looks like. The reviews I've shared here as the scientific reviews, which someone can do as a scientist, as an artist, like anyone can do, which I'm so sure even when you're doing the exhibition, there are fundamentals that form that, whatever you want that was exhibited. So I think looking at those fundamentals and reviewing them and knowing gaps into what people have not done and what you think should be done to improve. I think that could fall into the review we do as science. But in terms of exhibition, I am not certain about that. But trying to review the fundamentals, the principles, the mechanisms, the work practices and all that could be done on the side of either critical review, a desk review, a systematic review, a narrative review. That could be done.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so in the interest of time, I don't know if you have enough time to do a case study. I could do a simple case study for one of the projects I've just concluded. And I
think it will be great.
And I could use that project on talking about what were the objectives, what did we extract, what did we do, and how did we narrow down? And I can use that, try to speed up since I've already talked about all the principles, so it will be so easy. And if we need to do hands-on, I'm happy to share my screen and show you how did we extract here and how did we put that. What I could do for now is I could do the case study as a way of how is a review done? And then we could look into the other aspects. So
as you go, there's a very interesting question. You could help the student.
Do I have to use only my supervisor or doctoral committee to join in the review, or I can use any other person? The answer is you can use any other person. Because the review, you need to have the expertise, you need to have the guidance in narrowing down all that to make it easy. It is something that I think you can use any other person to guide you on that. All right, let me share my screen and then we'll be able to jump onto that. So I'm going to break the recording and then start the recording again as this is the case study. Otherwise, it's going to be too long to share it. Because the more it runs for a longer time, it grows bigger and it may be hard to share. So let me break the recording and then start it again.